The Vel-Soreth was dying quietly. That was the worst part, Chief Navigator Ossithin decided. Not the shuddering hull. The lights continued to alternate between amber and deep violet. Following patterns that no longer aligned with any emergency protocol she had committed to memory. The worst part was the quiet. The Vel-Soreth was a caretaker-class vessel, designed by the Sorethai people over 11 generations to hum. Always hum. The constant, low, bone-settling vibration assured every soul aboard that the ship was alive, attentive, and present. The hum had stopped 4 hours ago. Ossithin stood at the central navigation bloom, a curved wall of living crystal threaded with bioluminescent data, and watched the reading scroll in colors she had never been trained to interpret, because those colors were not supposed to exist in normal operation. Deep red, almost brown, the color of old blood left on stone, her grandmother had once told her. Navigator. The voice came from behind her. Soft, careful. It was Medic Pharaoh Vass, the youngest crew member aboard, his membrane frills pressed flat against his neck, the Sorethai equivalent of someone biting their lip to keep from crying. The secondary pressure chambers in decks 4 through 7 have sealed themselves. The ship's crew is making decisions without us. Caro, the word meant, roughly, the instinctive self. The term refers to the portion of a living system that initiates action prior to the arrival of conscious thought. Every Sorethai vessel had one, not an artificial intelligence in the cold, mechanical sense that other species used, but something grown, a nervous system threaded through the hull over decades, learning the crew, learning space, and learning particular grammar the route it traveled. The Caro of the Vel-Soreth had been growing for 61 years, and now it was sealing decks. Is it protecting us or containing something? Ossithin asked. Pharaoh Vass opened his mouth, closed it. The frills on his neck trembled. Navigator. I don't think it knows the difference anymore. That was the moment Ossithin made the decision. She crossed the bloom in 4 long strides, pressed both palms flat against the warm crystal surface, and felt the ship shiver under her touch. A small thing, like a large animal recognizing a familiar hand even in fever. She reached into the deep menu, the one that required physical contact and vocal resonance together, and she opened a channel that no Sorethai captain opened without enormous deliberation. The Deathworlder frequency. It had a different name officially. Interspecies Emergency Broadcast, Tier 1, but every species in the assembled corridor called it the Deathworlder frequency, because there was only one civilization that monitored it without pause, without bureaucratic delay, without committee review. In the 40 years since first contact, one civilization had answered every single Tier 1 signal sent. This was not because they were mandated to do so. The treaty did not mandate them to do so. Simply put, they couldn't help themselves. As far as anyone could tell, Ossithin pressed her resonance frequency into the crystal and spoke in the clipped, universal standard that all corridor species learned in early schooling. This is Chief Navigator Ossithin of the Sorethai caretaker vessel Vel-Soreth, which has a registry marked 7 Gold Crescent 9. We are experiencing systemic Caro collapse at coordinates I am now transmitting. We have 61 crew. I am, she paused. The pause was involuntary. Sorethai did not ask for help easily. It was not shame exactly, more like the specific vulnerability of admitting that a living thing you loved was beyond your ability to save. I am requesting assistance. She released the crystal. The room went quiet. Then, 11 seconds later, 11 seconds, which Pharaoh Vass would later describe to his children as the longest 11 seconds of his life, a voice came back. Not a committee voice, not a recorded acknowledgement. A single human voice, unhurried, carrying particular texture of someone who had just been pulled from sleep but was already fully present. Vel-Soreth. This is Commander Dar-Reyes of the human Dreadnought Amaranth Fault. We have your coordinates. We have your signal. We are already moving. Talk to me. What does a Caro collapse look like on the inside? Ossithin felt something shift in her chest. Not relief. Not yet. The recognition that the person on the other end of the signal had asked exactly the right question is a smaller and more precise measure. What do you need? I am not available for the protocol review, but describe it to me. I want to understand it as you experience it. It looks, she said slowly, like the ship is forgetting who we are. A brief silence. Then, okay, We'll be there in 6 hours. Keep talking to it. Talking to the ship? You said it knows the crew. It's in crisis. That means it's running on instinct, memory, and pattern. Talk to it. Remind it of patterns, routines, and anything repeated and familiar. Can you do that? Ossithin looked at Pharaohvas. His frills had lifted slightly. Just slightly. Yes, she said. We can do that. Good. Reyes is out. The channel hummed with a carrier wave. Still open. Still listening. The Vel Soreth groaned somewhere deep in its belly, a sound like old wooden wind, and Ossithin pressed her palm back against the crystal and began quietly to talk. 6 hours was an optimistic estimate. Commander Dar Reyes said it because Ossithin needed to hear it. And Reyes had learned through years of this kind of work that in a crisis, your intention matters more than the truth of an ETA. We are coming, which is more important than being there at precisely this time. The real number was 4 hours and 50 minutes, because the Amaranth Fault had already been in a high-burn transit corridor when the signal arrived, and because Reyes's helmsman, Petty Officer Renault, had immediately begun calculating intercept vectors before Reyes had finished her first sentence to the Vel Soreth. J1 had a tendency to act without prompting. Reyes had stopped trying to correct it years ago. The Amaranth Fault was not, by most definitions, a beautiful ship. It was a Meridian-class dreadnought, built wide, built heavy, built with a particular human philosophy that a vessel moving through deep space should be able to survive things it was not specifically designed to survive. Its hull was layered, not in the elegant, grown crystal way of the Sorethai, not in the precision lattice way of the Veth engineers to galactic south, but in the blunt, almost geological way that human engineers favored. Here is a wall. Behind it, another wall. Behind that, material that will absorb what the walls cannot stop. Aliens who toured the Amaranth Fault for the first time often went quiet in a specific way. Not intimidated exactly, but recalibrating. The ship felt, they said, like it had opinions. Reyes thought that was the nicest thing anyone had ever said about her vessel. She stood now at the mission briefing table with her senior crew. 6 humans and 1 Veth exchange officer named Crystalline Persistence, who had been aboard for 8 months and had developed a deep personal investment in understanding why humans did what they did. Crystalline Persistence was taking notes. She always took notes. Sorethai Caro collapse, Reyes said, pulling the technical summary she compiled during her sleep period onto the main screen. What do we know? Rare, said Dr. Emikin Wosu, the ship systems analyst, a tall man with reading glasses perched at the end of his nose even in 0G, which everyone had agreed to stop asking about. The Caro is grown tissue. It's more like a brain than a computer. Caro collapse happens when the system receives contradictory survival imperatives over an extended period, and essentially, J1 from the helm station stated, the system has experienced a breakdown. Emeka looked at him. I was going to say it enters a recursive conflict loop, but yes, J1, it has a breakdown. What caused it? Asked Chief Engineer Roberta Salinas, already pulling up the Vel Soreth's transmitted telemetry on her secondary screen. We don't know yet, Reyes said. We won't know until we're close enough for a deep scan. What we do know is that the ship is making autonomous decisions, sealing decks, rerouting resources, and those decisions may or may not be coherent. The crew is intact and in the forward sections, which suggests the Caro is still prioritizing them. But that could change. How do we help a biological ship brain that's having a breakdown? J1 asked, do we bring medication? Do we talk it down? Crystalline Persistence looked up from her notes. Her species communicated through bioluminescent skin patterns, but she had become very precise with spoken language over 8 months. Sorethai tradition holds that a ship's Caro can be reoriented through harmonic repetition, she said. A specific pattern of sounds and vibrations essentially reminds a ship of its essence, she explained. They call it a SYMJHY. It means approximately, I am still here, do you know me? The table was quiet. That's beautiful, said Jawan. It is also something that a Sorethai crew would typically perform, Crystalline Persistence continued. The question is whether the Caro will accept it from non-Sorethai sources. There is no precedent. Reyes picked up her coffee, cold, she hadn't noticed, and drank it anyway. There's no precedent for many things we do, she said. Emeka, I want you on the Caro system the moment we're in range. Roberta, could you please familiarize yourself with the Velsorth's architecture to ensure those sealed decks don't become permanent? J1, we have already adjusted our course for the minimum disruption approach vector, he stated. I don't want our engines adding stress to their hull harmonics. Reyes looked at him. I was going to say get some sleep. I'll sleep after. She almost argued. She let it go. One more thing, she said, and the table heard something in her voice shift, not colder, but more specific, more weighted. The Velsorth has 61 crew. Some of them are going to be frightened in ways we don't fully understand, because the issue isn't just a ship malfunctioning. It's a ship they have a relationship with. It's sick. Keep that in mind when you're working. We're not just fixing hardware. Crystalline Persistence's skin flickered. A brief warm gold that she had learned was a human color for agreement. We're attending to something living, she said softly. Yes, Reyes said. Exactly that. The Velsorth remembered the voyage to the Kresh Nebula. Ossithin knew the truth because when she pressed her palms, the crystal bloomed and spoke. Following Reyes' instruction, talking, just talking. The ship responded, not in words. The Caro did not use words. It responded in the way a body responds to familiar touch. Small adjustments, micro-releases of pressure, and a temperature shift in the walls around her that moved from the cold blue of crisis towards something barely, tentatively warmer. She talked about the Kresh Nebula voyage because it was the first mission she had served on this ship 12 years ago, as a junior navigation assistant barely old enough to hold her own membrane frills steady. Membrane frills are the delicate, flexible structures that some species use for navigation and communication. The Velsorth had carried a science team to the outer edge of the nebula to document a rare atmospheric event, a thing the Sorthai called Velisan, the long breath, when a nebula exhaled a wave of ionized particles across a span of several hundred kilometers. The whole crew had watched it from the observation decks. The Caro had, in its way, watched too. Ossithin remembered how the ship's hum had changed during the Velisan, dropping in frequency, almost as if the vessel was breathing with a nebula. She hadn't understood it then. Later she had come to believe that the Caro perceived beauty differently. Not visually or emotionally like Sorthai, but through pattern recognition that triggered a kind of resonant pleasure. Beautiful things were things that rhymed with the deep structures of space, and the Caro was always listening for that rhyme. She told the ship all of this. The wall beside her navigation bloom pulsed once, soft amber. Gone immediately, but it had been there. Ferrovas, standing watch near the door, exhaled slowly. It heard you. It hears all of us, Ossithin said. It always has. It's just that the thread has been lost. It knows we're here, but it can't quite connect the knowing to the caring. Is that what collapse looks like? From inside of the Caro, I mean? She thought about it. I think it's like waking in a place you know perfectly well, and, for one terrible moment, not knowing why you're there. It's as if you don't know your identity in relation to your current location. And in that moment, she pressed her palm flat again, feeling the faint warmth of the crystal. In that moment, everything the body does is automatic, reflex, fear response, not thought. Then we keep reminding it. Ferrovas said simply, down the corridor. She could hear it. The rest of the crew, following the instruction that she had passed through every section still accessible. Talk to the ship. Tell it something true. Please share something it is already aware of. She could hear Engineer Yosahan recounting, in his rough dock district accent, the story of how he'd fixed the tertiary pressure line 3 years ago using a method that the ship had apparently found alarming enough to send a cascade of alerts, and how he had spoken sternly to the alerts until they stopped. Because we had an understanding, you and I. You remember that? We had words. His voice was fond. His voice sounded as if he were conversing with a resolute old friend. She could hear Navigator's Aid Prince singing. The song was a low, repetitive melody, commonly used during long calibration shifts. The ship had heard that song hundreds of times, and she could feel, beneath her palms, beneath her feet, in the soles of her boots where they met the deck, the ship listening, still fragmented. The ship continued to be lost in its recursive crisis, struggling to find a way out of the turmoil that had ensnared it, which was causing it to feel disoriented and disconnected from its surroundings. But listening, Hold on, she thought, pressing the thought into the crystal, as if it had weight. Help is coming. The crystal pulsed amber again. The crystal maintained this color for nearly 3 full seconds. The amaranth fall dropped from transit burn into real space with a precision that made Osathin's instruments momentarily spike. Not from damage, but from sheer displacement. The Dreadnought was large. She knew these facts in the abstract. She had seen the specifications in the corridor database. Seeing it in her visual field was something different. The amaranth fault was wide and dark and layered, and it moved with a heaviness that was nonetheless deliberate, like something massive that had learned patience. Osathin had met humans before, in station environments, in diplomatic contexts. She understood them intellectually, but she had never been close to one of their ships in open space, and the first thing she thought, which she later told Reyes, who laughed, was, "It looks like it has already survived something terrible and is not concerned about surviving something else." The comm channel opened. Velsorath, this is Amaranth Fault. We're coming in slow. We're broadcasting on a low-frequency harmonic. Your Caro should register it as a non-threat. How is your crew? Intact. Out of the 61. 59 are in the forward sections. The other 2 are in sealed Area 4 crash. We can still communicate with them, and they are unharmed, but the ship will not open those sections. Why those 2 specifically? Osathin paused. We're not certain. Our current theory is that the Caro is protecting them from something it perceives as a threat in the forward sections, which would mean it has a threat and the safe zone inverted. Or, said Reyes' voice, and there was a quality to it, not correcting, but opening up space for another possibility. It separated them because they were the most distressed, and it's tried to give them quiet. Silence on both ends. Pharaoh Vass looked at Osathin. Our medic Pharaoh Vass has been concerned about that theory. Osathin said carefully. We couldn't determine if it was comforting or alarming. Could be both, Reyes said. Who are the 2 crew members? Senior historian Pelon and engineer's apprentice Yaniso are present. She is young. This is her first deep space posting. Okay, Reyes said. We'll keep that in mind. We're going to hold position at 2 kilometers and deploy a soft dock to your port airlock, the one that is still in your accessible section. I'd like to come aboard with a small team. The team will consist of 2 humans and 1 member of our crew who has studied the architecture of Sorathai vessels. I want to see what the Caro shows me directly. You want to come aboard personally? I find it's better, Reyes said simply. Data tells me what's happening. Being in a place tells me how it feels to be there. Those are different things. Osathin considered this. Then, Commander Reyes the Caro, it may respond to you in ways I cannot predict. It may perceive you as a threat, an unknown, which is nearly the same thing in its current state. Then we'll introduce ourselves slowly, Reyes said. You would treat it like any frightened living thing. She expected competence. Reyes arrived with it. That was clear from the first minute. From the way the commander moved through the Velsorath's corridors with a specific kind of attention that was neither tense nor casual, but genuinely interested. Her gaze moving across the walls and the crystal conduits and the amber-brown warning pulses with the expression of someone reading a language they were in the process of learning. She expected the engineer, Roberta Salinas, a compact woman with callous hands who immediately crouched beside every junction panel she passed and looked at the back of it, not the face, with penlight in her teeth. Osathin understood this person completely. Every ship had one. She did not expect a 3rd member of the team, who was a unique and unexpected addition that brought a different dynamic to their mission, as her unconventional approach and ability to interpret the environment in a fluid manner enhanced their strategic planning. Crystalline persistence was unlike any being Osathin had encountered. The Veth were known to the Sorathai, a diplomatic, pattern-oriented species, but this specific individual moved through the Velsorath as though she were reading music. Her skin shifted in slow, soft patterns. And when she stopped beside the navigation bloom and pressed a single 3-fingered hand against the crystal without asking, which Osathin nearly protested, the bloom pulsed. Not amber, not the warning brown. Gold. Crystalline persistence turned. It recognized a gesture, she said quietly. I used a Veth resonance acknowledgement, which is a method of confirming a signal or gesture in communication. It's close enough to Sorathiab SY MJHY that the Karo parse it as a greeting. Osathin stared at her. You've studied the Karo language? I've been studying it since we received your signal, Crystalline Persistence said. 4 hours and 50 minutes is sufficient for basic structural analysis if you don't sleep. Reyes was looking at her with an expression that Osathin later learned to identify as, "This is exactly why she's on my crew." But what happened next was completely unexpected for Osathin, especially from a human commander in the middle of a crisis. Reyes stopped walking. She was standing in the central corridor of Deck 2, the one that ran the length of the ship's primary spine, and she stopped, and she looked up at the ceiling, the living ceiling, threaded with Karo tissue, and she said, "Not into a communicator, not for the record, just into the air of the ship. You've been holding these people together for 4 hours by yourself. That's a long time to be scared and alone. We're here now. You don't have to do this alone." The corridor went very still, and then, slow and deep and unmistakable, the Vel Sorath hummed. Not fully. It was not the robust, continuous hum of a ship in good health. A fragment of it, a thread. It resembles a voice that has been silent for an extended period, struggling to find the right words to express itself. Pharaoh Vast made a sound that, in humans, would have been a choke breath. Osathin did not move. She was afraid that if she moved, the moment would stop. Reyes looked over at her, and her expression was not triumphant. Not, "Look what I did," but something quieter and more careful. "The Karo," she said softly. "It understands spoken language. It understands intention," Osathin said when she trusted her voice. "It reads the shape of communication, not the words, the weight of them." Reyes nodded slowly. "Then let's not waste that." Roberta Salinas found it at hour 2. She had been working her way through the sealed deck junctions, not trying to force them. She had specifically told her team, "Do not force anything on this ship. I will know if you forced it, and I will be very disappointed, but instead, I will map the logic of the sealing sequence." She determined which decks in which order were triggered by which inputs. The pattern she found was not random. "Commander," she said over the team channel, "come look at this." Reyes came. Osathin came. Crystalline Persistence was already there, her skin patterning rapidly, the Veth equivalent of intense focus. On Salinas' portable display, the sealing sequence was laid out as a cascade diagram. Deck 7 was sealed first, then 6, then 5. Subsequently, for seals formed around Pelon and Yaniso, each seal was activated not because of a problem or warning, but by one constant signal, a low-frequency vibration coming from the Vel Sorath's secondary resonance array. The array was responsible for managing long-range harmonic communication. Something was broadcasting at the ship, Salinas said. From outside, before your Karo collapsed, something was transmitting directly at your resonance array on a frequency close enough to Karo's wavelength that the system registered it as. "As a voice," Crystalline Persistence said. Her skin had gone a color. Osathin didn't know. Something was speaking to the Karo in a language it almost understood. And the Karo, panicked, Osathin said. The word came out flat and cold. Reyes stated, "We attempted to shield the crew from any potential threats. Sealed the decks inward. Put the most vulnerable crew in the most protected space." Osathin's hands were very still. What was broadcasting at us? Salinas pulled up the signal trace. It was still in the array's memory. The Karo had preserved it, which Salinas said she found either intelligent or haunting. She couldn't decide which. The signal was complex. Not random noise. Not a natural phenomenon. Structured. Repeating. The signature was completely unregistered in any corridor database. "We've never seen this signature before," Reyes said quietly. "No," said Salinas. The corridor hummed around them. That thread of recovered sound, the Vel Sorath's fragile returning voice. Osathin listened to it and realized the ship had been trying to tell them this from the beginning. It had not had a breakdown in the clinical sense. It had been frightened. It had reacted to something real. What did it want? Pharaoh Vast asked. He had followed them without being asked. No one had told him to leave. "We don't know," Reyes said. She was still looking at the signal trace on Salinas' screen, and her expression had changed in a way that Ossithin observed carefully. Not fear, not excitement, something between them. The specific expression, she would later understand, of a person who has just seen that the problem they came to solve is a smaller part of a much larger problem that no one has noticed yet. "We need to record everything," Reyes said. "And we need to get your crew to safety before we figure out what this is." "You're not going to investigate immediately?" Ossithin asked. "The 61 of you come first," Reyes said. "The signal will still be there when everyone is safe." It was such a simple statement. Ossithin turned it over in her mind and found, to her quiet surprise, that it was not simple at all. The process of restoring the Caro took everything they had. Not technically. Salinas had, within 40 minutes of understanding the architecture, developed a method of introducing a counterharmonic through the resonance array that would essentially, as she described it, play the Caro back to itself. The array had recorded the ship's own healthy harmonics before the arrival of the external signal. Thekkero's own voice returned to it. What it took was endurance, because the process required someone to maintain physical contact with the crystal bloom throughout, to provide the biological resonance anchor that allowed the harmonic to be received as internal rather than external. Otherwise, the Caro might perceive even its own return voice as another intrusion. Ossithin volunteered. Of course she did. But Salinas' equipment required precise calibration adjustments every 11 minutes, and Crystalline Persistence was the only one who could read the Caro's response patterns in real time. And Rhea stayed because, as she said, and she offered no further explanation, she stayed. So the four of them worked in the corridor outside the navigation bloom for 3 hours and 17 minutes. Ossithin, with her palms on the crystal, speaking whenever the hum faltered, talking about the Kresh Nebula, about long calibration shifts, about the smell of the corridors after the humidity recyclers ran their full cycle, and about the specific quality of starlight to the Sorthai observation port material, which filtered certain frequencies to preserve the membrane frills of the Long Watch crew. Specific things. True things. The Caro had known these truths for 61 years already. SYMJHY. I am still here. Do you know me? Salinas made her adjustments in silence, focused and precise. Crystalline Persistence relayed information in short, clean phrases. Reyes, and this was the thing that Ossithin kept returning to afterward, kept examining the way you examine a stone that turns out to be heavier than it looks. Reyes sat against the corridor wall, and at some point began to hum. The hum wasn't a Sorthai resonance pattern. It was not a harmonic structure found in Veth music. It was a human song, characterized by its structural simplicity, melodic repetition, and short, self-repeating pattern. Ossithin didn't know it. She asked later. Rhea said it was something her grandmother had sung, that she'd had in her head since the day she boarded her first ship and couldn't fully explain why. The Caro, and the action was documented in Salinas' logs, time-stamped, irrefutable, responded to human song. Not dramatically. The response was not dramatic, nor did it follow a narrative pattern, a gradual thing, the amber warning pulses in the corridor walls shifting toward neutral. The temperature is rising 2 degrees. And then, at the 2-hour and 49-minute mark, the sealed junction to Deck 4 Kresh clicked open with sound like a joint releasing, the specific sound of something that has been held tense for a very long time finally, carefully letting go. Through the open junction, Pelon, the senior historian, looking exhausted and dignified in equal measure, and behind him, young Yaniso, her membrane frills still pressed flat but her eyes wide, taking the humans, the Veth, the open corridor, and the amber walls slowly cycling back toward their resting state. She looked at Reyes. Reyes looked back at her, stopped humming. "Hey," Reyes said, "are you okay?" Yaniso considered this question with the thoroughness of someone for whom universal standards were a second language and accuracy mattered. Then she said, "The ship kept the walls warm. The whole time, the walls stayed warm. It was protecting you." Ossithin said softly, "I know." Yaniso said, "I talked to it too." She paused. "I told it about my mother's garden. She grows things in pressurized soil columns. I described every plant. I thought," she hesitated, membrane frills thin, flexible extensions, lifting just slightly. "I thought, if it's afraid, maybe something growing would help." No one spoke for a moment. Then Crystalline Persistence's skin pulsed. Slow, warm gold. The Caro's response metrics elevated while she was in that section, she said to the room, in a tone that was technically informational and also unmistakably tender. Yeah, said Salinas, not looking up from her calibration screen, voice entirely flat and professional. I see that in the data. The Velsortha's hum returned fully at hour 9. It was not the fragmented thread that had been present during the recovery hours. The real hum, low, constant, and bone-settling, was the sound of a 61-year-old ship that knew exactly where it was and who it carried. When it came back, the effect on the Sorthai crew was immediate and profound in a way that no human on the Amaranth Fault had quite anticipated, despite everything they had been told. Osathin sat down on the corridor floor. She sat down, her back against the crystal wall, her palms still resting on the bloom surface. For a long moment, she remained motionless and silent. Her membrane frills, which she meticulously controlled in professional contexts, spread fully, caught the amber light, and trembled. Reyes sat down next to her on the floor. Not to say anything. Reyes did not intend to inquire about her condition, just to sit. I need to show you something, Osathin said eventually. I know, Reyes said. The unknown signal. They had preserved it completely. Salinas had made certain of that in the Velsortha's analysis area. With the Caro now stable enough to help with data processing, they displayed the signal in different ways, visually by its frequency and in the three-dimensional format that Sorthai used for detailed sound analysis. It was, Osathin said, looking at it clearly for first time, like looking at a word in an alphabet you had never seen. You could tell it was a word. The structure was too intentional to be anything else. The internal repetition was too precise. Whatever had broadcast this had meant it to communicate something, possibly a warning or a message of significance to those who could decipher it. But the alphabet, the underlying framework from which the word had been built, existed in no database, was cross-referenced against no known language, and matched no acoustic signature of any catalog species in the entire assembled corridor. How far out did it originate? Reyes asked Salinas. That's the part that I keep running and getting the same answer for, Salinas said. She had the same look she wore when she wanted to be wrong, but the data did not cooperate. Based on signal dispersion and Doppler shift, it originated at least 40 light-years from your last recorded position, Velsorth. Maybe further. The dispersion pattern is unusual. Unusual how? It dispersed inward, Salinas said. The signal was aimed to focus over distance rather than spread. It became more coherent as it traveled. That's not how transmission physics works. None of the versions I've been taught. The analysis room was quiet. Osathin looked at the harmonic display, the unknown word floating in 3 dimensions, and remembered what the Caro had done when it heard it. The panic, the sealing, and the long, desperate hours spent keeping the crew safe were all part of the hero's instinctive response. It frightened a 61-year-old ship, she said. Yes, Reyes said. A ship that's been through the Kresh Nebula, through 2 debris fields, and through a near-miss with gravitational lens event that pulled 3 of our external sensors completely off. A ship that has never, in 61 years, had a Caro crisis. Yes. Osathin looked at her. What do we do? Reyes picked up her cold coffee. She had apparently brought it aboard, and it was still cold, and she was still drinking it, and looked at the signal display for a long time. We reported to every corridor member simultaneously. We preserve the full data package. We do not broadcast on any frequency near its signature until we understand it better. She set the coffee down. And we make sure you get home. And then Reyes smiled. Small, not quite comfortable. The smile of someone sitting with large uncertainty they have decided to carry rather than resolve prematurely. Then we find out who learned to make a long-distance signal and why they chose a living ship to say it to. Perhaps, Crystalline Persistence said from the doorway. She had a habit of appearing in doorways. They were not speaking to the ship. Everyone looked at her. The Caro is biological tissue, she said. The signal was calibrated to the Caro wavelength. Perhaps they were speaking to it specifically, not to the crew, not to the vessel. She paused. Perhaps they wanted to speak to something alive. The unknown word floated in the harmonic display. No one, for a moment, had anything to say to that. The Amaranth Fault stayed for 3 days. This was not protocol. An emergency response vessel, once the emergency was resolved, was not required to remain. But Reyes had made a judgment call, and the judgment was this: that a ship that had been through what the Velsorith had been through deserved a measured departure, not an immediate abandonment. The Carol was stable. The crew was whole. The sealed decks had reopened one by one over the first 18 hours as the ship processed its return to itself. But healing was not the same as recovery, and Reyes had long ago formed the opinion that the difference between those two things was whether or not someone witnessed the space between them. On the second day, Yaniso asked if she could tour the Amaranth Fault. Reyes said yes before Ossithin could raise a logistical question. Yaniso came back 4 hours later. She had been shown the engine room by Jawan, who had at some point given her a task to perform and then apparently been genuinely impressed by her completion of it, because she arrived back on the Velsorith with the specific energy of someone who has been taken seriously. Her membrane frills were fully extended for the first time Ossithin had seen in days. On the third day, Ossithin asked Reyes what she had thought. Honestly, when the Velsorith's hum had returned, they were sitting in the observation space at the forward end of the Velsorith, the one with the viewport material that filtered certain frequencies. The starfield outside was blue shifted slightly, the particular cool tone that Ossithin had always found beautiful. Reyes looked at it for a moment before answering. I thought, she stopped, started again. When I was very young, my father was in the hospital for a long time. Heart, old damage, and there was a monitor by his bed that showed his rhythm. When the device was wrong, it made sounds. And for a long time when I visited, the sounds it made were, she turned her coffee cup in her hands. Still cold, somehow, always cold. When his rhythm came back fully after surgery, it made a different sound, just a steady sound. And I remember thinking, oh, that's what he sounds like when he's himself. She looked at Ossithin. That's what I thought when the hum came back. I thought, oh, that's what this ship sounds like when it's itself. Ossithin was quiet for a moment. You've lost someone, she said. Not a question. Yes, Reyes said. You came when we called because... I come when people call, Reyes said. Simple, not a philosophy statement. She simply stated a fact about herself in a straightforward manner. That's just what I do. Ossithin considered this. She looked at the blue-shifted stars and felt the hum of the Velsorith in her feet, her palms, and her chest, steady and present and fully itself again. The signal, she said. Are you afraid of it? I'm attentive to it, Reyes said carefully. There's a difference. Is there? Fear narrows what you can do, Reyes said. Attention widens it. She looked at Ossithin. Are you afraid? Ossithin thought about the unknown word floating in 3 dimensions. She thought about the Caro, which was 61 years old and had been through debris fields and gravitational lens events. She had heard one signal from somewhere in the dark and immediately, instinctively, wrapped itself around 61 lives and held on. I think, she said slowly, that I am afraid of what it means, not of the signal itself. The fear stems from the realization that an entity has observed a living being and made the decision to communicate with it. She paused. This implies that they comprehend the essence of life. They recognize their worth and value. Reyes was quiet. And if they understand that, Ossithin continued, I don't know what they want from us, but I know they're thinking about us the way you think about a person, not a resource, not an obstacle. She looked at Reyes. Someone. The Amaranth Fault hung outside the viewport, wide and dark and layered, its hull reflecting the blue-shifted light in dull geological plains. It had arrived heavy and deliberate, and it had stayed. And in staying it had changed something, not dramatically, not in the way of legends, but in the quiet way that two beings change each other simply by spending time in the same place and paying attention. On the departure morning, Reyes stood at the soft dock junction with her team. Salinas, J1, Crystalline Persistence, and Emeka and Ossithin stood with hers. There was a formal farewell protocol in the corridor, involving resonance acknowledgement and log gratitude citations. Reyes shook Ossithin's hand instead, a human custom, both palms briefly clasped. Up SY MJHY, Rhea said, "Careful pronunciation, clearly practiced. I am still here. Do you know me?" Ossithin looked at her. This human woman with her cold coffee, and her grandmother's song, and her habit of sitting down next to frightened people on the floor rather than standing over them, and her membrane frills spread without her willing them to. "Yes," she said, "I know you." The Amaranth Fault undocked slowly. Its engines were built in the low, heavy way of a vessel that had been built to last. It turned toward deep space, toward, somewhere in the dark, the direction a signal that had focused itself over 40 light years to speak to something alive. The Velsorath hummed. Constant, low, bone-setting, present. "I am still here," it said, in the only language it had ever known. "I am still here, and